For as long as I can remember, my life has been a balancing act walking the tightrope between personal ambition and familial obligation. At 32, I'm not just Dean, the guy with a stable tech job in Seattle. I'm Dean, the financial backbone of a family that seems to thrive on taking without ever truly giving back. My career isn't glamorous, but it pays well enough to keep me comfortable, or at least, it should have. Instead, every paycheck feels like it's earmarked before it even hits my account. From house repairs to wedding expenses, tuition fees to emergency loans, I've become the invisible safety net for a family who doesn't hesitate to exploit my willingness to help. It wasn't always this way. Growing up, I was the responsible one, the quiet older brother who worked part-time jobs while Vanessa got all the attention. But responsibility turned into something darker over time, a suffocating expectation that I would always be there to clean up their messes. The worst part, they don't see it as exploitation. To them, it's just what I do. It's my role, my duty, my unspoken obligation. And if I ever dare to question it, they twist it into some grand narrative about how selfish or ungrateful I am. The stress nearly broke me once, a few years ago, when Vanessa decided she needed a brand new car for her 16th birthday, not because she needed it, but because she deserved it. I had no choice but to dip into my college savings. My parents didn't outright demand it. Of course, that's not their style. No, they framed it as a moral imperative. Family supports each other. Dean, you're doing so well. Why can't you chip in? Those words still echo in my mind, a constant reminder of how easily guilt can be weaponized against you. I gave in, naturally. What else could I do? Refusing would have meant weeks of passive-aggressive comments, tearful phone calls, and an endless parade of emotional manipulation. So I handed over the money, watching my dreams of financial independence slip further away. But the breaking point came later, during one particularly grueling year at work. I was pulling 60-hour weeks, surviving on caffeine and sheer willpower, trying to meet impossible deadlines while also dealing with the mounting pressure from home. Vanessa wanted more money for grad school, for rent, for God knows what, and my parents were calling me daily, pleading with me to just help her out. Meanwhile, I was drowning in stress, in exhaustion, in the crushing realization that no matter how much I sacrificed, it would never be enough. One night, after yet another argument with my mom about why I couldn't send Vanessa another $5,000, I collapsed. Literally. I woke up on the bathroom floor, my heart racing, my vision blurred, convinced I was having a heart attack. It turned out to be a panic attack, but the message was clear. My body couldn't take it anymore. Something had to give. That moment changed everything. For the first time, I realized that being the dependable one didn't make me valuable, it made me expendable. My family saw me as a resource, not a person. And if I didn't start setting boundaries, I would lose myself completely. So I began to push back, tentatively at first, then with growing resolve. I stopped answering every call, stopped saying yes to every request. It wasn't easy. Every refusal felt like a betrayal. Every boundary I set seemed to invite chaos. But deep down, I knew I couldn't keep living this way, not if I wanted to survive. Growing up, I always knew my place in the family dynamic. Vanessa was the golden child, and I was the workhorse. While she basked in the spotlight of parental admiration, I quietly carried the weight of financial responsibility on my shoulders. It wasn't something that was ever explicitly stated, it just happened. My parents never said, "Dean, you're a safety net," but their actions spoke volumes. Every time Vanessa needed money for a new dress or tuition fees, they turned to me without hesitation. And every time, I complied, not because I wanted to, but because saying no felt like signing myself up for an endless barrage of guilt trips and passive-aggressive comments. Vanessa, oh Vanessa, she had this uncanny ability to twist situations so effortlessly, making herself appear as the victim while painting me as the villain. Her manipulation wasn't overt, it was subtle, insidious, almost poetic in its execution. When she wanted something, she'd drop hints about how hard her life was, how unfair things were for her, and how much easier everything would be if only someone read, me, could step in and help. The worst part, my parents ate it up. They lapped up her sob stories like starving dogs at a dinner table, completely oblivious to the fact that she was using them and me as pawns in her grand game of emotional chess. But nothing encapsulated the sheer absurdity of our family dynamics more than the time I fell seriously ill. I remember waking up one morning with a fever so high I could barely think straight. My body ached, my head throbbed, and all I wanted to do was crawl into bed and disappear under the covers. But instead of resting, I found myself staring at my phone, dreading the inevitable call from my mom. Sure enough, it came later that afternoon, a chirpy voice on the other end asking if I could send some extra cash because Vanessa's car had broken down. Again. "Mom," I croaked, my throat dry and scratchy. "I'm really sick right now. Can we talk about this later?" "Oh, honey, I'm sorry to hear that," she replied, her tone dripping with concern but not enough to stop what came next. "But you know how it is with Vanessa. She can't get to work without her car, and your dad and I are stretched thin this month. We were hoping you could lend a hand." Lend a hand. That phrase haunted me. It wasn't a request. It was a demand wrapped in saccharine sweetness. Even when I was at my lowest, they still expected me to be the rock, the provider, the one who kept everything together. So, despite feeling like death warmed over, I dragged myself out of bed, logged into my bank account, and transferred the money. Because that's what I did. I sacrificed my own well-being for the sake of keeping the peace. That moment crystallized everything wrong with our relationship. Here I was, lying in bed with a fever that made my bones feel like lead, sending money to fix a problem I didn't create, for a sister who wouldn't hesitate to throw me under the bus if it served her interests. And my parents, they didn't even question whether I was okay. To them, I wasn't a person, I was a resource. A walking ATM machine whose sole purpose was to ensure Vanessa's happiness and comfort. It wasn't the first time I felt invisible, but it was the first time I truly understood the depth of their exploitation. Over the years, I'd convinced myself that helping them was noble, that it was my duty as the older sibling to take care of everyone else. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was enabling their dysfunction. Every dollar I sent, every favor I granted, reinforced the idea that I existed solely to serve them. And Vanessa. She played her role to perfection, alternating between charm and tears depending on what worked best to get what she wanted. What hurt the most was realizing that my parents didn't see me as valuable unless I was giving something back. Vanessa could waltz into Thanksgiving dinner wearing sweatpants and a messy bun, and they'd still gush about how proud they were of her. Meanwhile, I could show up dressed to the nines, bearing gifts and good intentions, and still leave feeling like I hadn't done enough. Their love, or whatever approximation of it they offered, was conditional. For Vanessa, it was unconditional adoration. For me, it was transactional. And yet, I kept going back for more. Maybe it was hope, the hope that one day they'd recognize my sacrifices and appreciate me for who I am rather than what I can provide. Or maybe it was fear, the fear that if I stopped playing my role, I'd lose them entirely. Either way, I stayed trapped in this cycle of giving and taking, until I couldn't breathe anymore. Looking back, I realize how toxic it all was. How every interaction was tinged with manipulation, how every conversation revolved around what I could offer rather than who I was. But at the time, I didn't have the strength or perhaps the clarity to break free. All I knew was that I was drowning, suffocating under the weight of expectations that weren't mine to bear. And the sickest part, they didn't even realize they were doing it. It all came to a head the week before Christmas, a time that was supposed to be about warmth, connection, and family, but for me, it became the breaking point. I had just finished work on a Friday evening when my phone buzzed with an incoming call from Mom. At first, I didn't think much of it. Calls from her around the holidays were routine. But as soon as I picked up, something felt off. Her voice carried that overly sweet tone she used whenever she was about to drop bad news. "Hi, honey," she started, her words dripping with forced cheerfulness. "How are you?" "I'm fine," I replied curtly, already sensing where this was going. We exchanged pleasantries for a minute or two. "How's work? How's Seattle? Blah blah," but then she cut straight to the chase. "Listen, Dean," she said, dragging out each syllable like she was trying to soften the blow. "We've been thinking, maybe it's best if you don't come to Christmas this year." I froze. For a moment, I thought I'd misheard her. "Wait, what? Why wouldn't I come to Christmas?" "Well," she hesitated, clearly uncomfortable now. "Vanessa mentioned some things you've said recently, and we just don't want any negativity ruining the day." "Negativity?" I repeated, incredulous. "What are you talking about? What did Vanessa say?" Mom sighed, clearly reluctant to elaborate. "She told us you've been saying some pretty hurtful things about Christmas, that you hate spending money on gifts for the family and think our Christmases are a waste of time because they're all about her." My blood boiled instantly. "Are you serious?" "I never said anything like that." "Well," her voice faltered slightly. "Vanessa seemed pretty upset about it. She said you've been talking to people about how much you don't like our Christmases and how you don't think they're worth your time." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Not only was this a blatant lie, but the fact that my mom believed Vanessa without even asking me about it stung more than I expected. It wasn't the first time Vanessa had twisted things to make herself look good and me look bad, but this felt like a new low. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice calm despite the storm brewing inside me, "I don't know what Vanessa told you, but I never said anything like that. In fact, I've been planning what to get you and Dad for Christmas for weeks." "Well," she trailed off again, using that tone she always does when she doesn't want to argue. "We just think it's better if you sit this one out. You've seemed a little distant lately, and we don't want any tension during the holidays." At that point, I realized there was no point in arguing. My mom had already made up her mind, and nothing I said was going to change it. "Fine," I said, keeping my tone short, "if that's what you want." She sounded surprised that I wasn't fighting her on it. "It's not about what we want, honey. We just think it's for the best." "Sure," I said, sarcasm dripping from every word. "Merry Christmas, Mom." Then I hung up. I sat there for a minute, staring at my phone, feeling a mix of anger and exhaustion. I wasn't even angry anymore, just tired. Tired of always being the one who had to explain himself, the one who had to defend himself against Vanessa's lies. It was like no matter what I did, I was always the bad guy in her story. The next day, Vanessa called me. At first, I didn't even want to answer. I figured she'd probably call to gloat about how she'd gotten me uninvited to Christmas. But curiosity got the better of me, so I picked up. "Hey, Dean," she chirped, her voice as cheerful as ever, like nothing had happened. "What do you want, Vanessa?" I snapped, not bothering to pretend I was happy to hear from her. She didn't even acknowledge my tone. "So listen, I need a little help. My grad school tuition is due soon, and Mom and Dad can't really afford to help much right now. I was hoping you could pitch in." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Are you serious? You just got me uninvited to Christmas, and now you're asking me for money?" There was a pause, like she hadn't expected me to bring that up. "Oh, come on, Dean," she said finally, her tone light and dismissive. "That's not what this is about. Christmas is one thing, but this is important. It's my education." I could feel my blood boiling, but I forced myself to stay calm. "Vanessa, do you even hear yourself? You lied to Mom and Dad about me, got me kicked out of Christmas, and now you want me to pay for your tuition. Do you even care how messed up that sounds?" She sighed dramatically, like I was the one being difficult. "Dean, don't be so dramatic. Mom and Dad just wanted a peaceful Christmas, and you've been kind of negative lately. Besides, this isn't about Christmas, it's about helping your family." And there it was, the guilt trip Vanessa had perfected over the years. Whenever she wanted something, she'd play the family card, like it was my job to fix all her problems just because we shared DNA. "I'll think about it," I said, cutting her off before she could go any further. She seemed satisfied with that. "Great, thanks, Dean. I knew I could count on you." And with that, she hung up. The audacity was mind-blowing. Not only had Vanessa managed to turn my own family against me, but now she had the nerve to ask me for money like nothing had happened. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized this wasn't just about Christmas or tuition. This was about years of being taken for granted, years of being expected to step up and help while Vanessa coasted through life with a smile and a sob story. I wasn't going to let it slide this time. The day after Vanessa called me, I called my mom and told her we needed a family meeting, me, her, dad, Vanessa, and Matt. We're sitting down tomorrow, and we're talking about this, I said firmly. Mom hesitated, like she always does when she thinks I'm about to disrupt the balance Vanessa's got her wrapped around. Dean, is this really necessary? It's necessary, I interrupted. I just got kicked out of Christmas because of something Vanessa said that isn't even true. We're going to talk about it. After a pause, she reluctantly agreed. Fine, tomorrow at 6. But, Dean, please don't make this a big thing. Christmas is coming, and I don't want any stress in the air. I hung up without responding. If my own family didn't want me there for Christmas, I didn't see the point in pretending everything was fine. The next evening, I pulled up to my parents' house. It was the same place I'd grown up in, but over the years, it had started to feel less like home and more like a place I was tolerated in. I didn't bother dressing up, just jeans and a hoodie. This wasn't about impressing anyone. When I walked in, Vanessa and Matt were already there. Matt gave me his usual awkward nod, the kind that said, I don't want to be involved in this. Vanessa didn't even look up from her phone, typical. Mom came out of the kitchen carrying a tray of coffee and cookies, like this was some kind of festive get-together. Hi, Dean, she said, forcing a smile. We were just getting settled. Great, I said, not bothering to fake any pleasantry. Let's get started. Dad was in his recliner, arms crossed, watching me like I was the problem. I ignored him and took a seat across from Vanessa. She finally looked up, her face a mix of fake innocence and mild annoyance. So, Mom said after a moment of awkward silence, what did you want to talk about, Dean? I didn't waste time. This is about Christmas and the fact that I wasn't invited because of something Vanessa said that's completely untrue. Vanessa rolled her eyes. Oh my God, are you still on that? She said, her tone dripping with annoyance. I didn't lie. That's what you said, or at least how it came across. Really, I shot back, pulling out my phone. Because I have the texts to prove otherwise. Her smug expression faltered for a second, but she quickly recovered. Texts, yeah, show me. I scrolled through my messages and opened the conversation where I'd asked Vanessa for gift ideas. Here's me asking Vanessa for gift ideas, I said, handing my phone to Mom. And here's her response. Why waste money on gifts they don't even appreciate half the time? I let that sink in for a moment before adding, so tell me again, Vanessa, how I'm the one who hates Christmas and doesn't want to spend money on gifts. The room went dead silent. Mom looked up at Vanessa, her expression confused. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, like he didn't know how to process what he was hearing. Vanessa, on the other hand, doubled down. Oh, come on, she said, crossing her arms. You're making this a bigger deal than it needs to be. I didn't mean it like that. Didn't mean it like what? I shot back. You told Mom and Dad lies about me. Meanwhile, you're the one complaining about how much gifts cost and saying they don't appreciate them anyway. She glared at me, but I could see the cracks in her confidence. It's not a big deal, Dean. You're overreacting. I turned to Mom. Am I overreacting? Because you believed her without even asking me about it. You kicked me out of Christmas based on her word alone. Mom opened her mouth to respond, but nothing came out. She looked at Dad, probably hoping he'd back her up, but he just sat there, arms crossed, staring at the floor. Vanessa wasn't done yet. She shifted in her seat, her arms crossed, but there was a calculated look in her eyes now. I'd seen it 100 times before. It was the look she gave right before turning everything around to make herself the victim. Okay, fine, Vanessa said, throwing her hands up. Yes, I said that, but do you want to know why? Because I've been under so much pressure lately, and it's been really hard to keep up with everything. I'm barely holding it together as it is, and now you're dragging me through the mud in front of everyone just to make yourself look better. Mom's face softened immediately, and I could see Dad's skull deepen. Vanessa, Mom said gently, what do you mean, honey? What's been so hard? Vanessa sniffed dramatically, as if she were on the verge of tears. Grad school, for one thing, she said, her voice wavering just enough to sell it. And you know, Matt and I are still trying to pay off the wedding, plus everything is so expensive now, groceries, rent, everything. It's not like I have someone swooping in to save the day for me. I'm doing the best I can. She glanced at me as she said that last part, like I was the one who'd somehow failed her. I rolled my eyes. You've got to be kidding me, Vanessa. You literally asked me for thousands of dollars yesterday. You don't get to play the I have no support card when you've been leaning on me and Mom and Dad for years. That's enough, Dean, Mom snapped, her voice sharp for the first time all night. There's no need to be so cruel. Cruel, I said, incredulous. Mom, she lied about me to get me kicked out of Christmas, and now she's turning this whole thing into a pity party because she doesn't want to take responsibility. Vanessa shook her head, her expression a perfect mix of hurt and frustration. You don't get it, Dean, she said, her voice breaking slightly. You've never had to worry about this stuff. You've always had a good job, plenty of money, no one depending on you. It's easy for you to sit there and judge me, but you don't know what it's like to actually struggle. That hit a nerve. I leaned forward, my hands clenched into fists on my knees. Are you serious right now, Vanessa? I've been working since I was 16. I paid for my own college. I've helped Mom and Dad with bills, and I've bailed you out more times than I can count. Don't sit there and act like I've had it easy just because I don't complain about every little thing. Dean, enough, Dad barked, his voice loud enough to make everyone jump. You've made your point. There's no need to keep piling on. Piling on, I said, my voice rising. Dad, she's the one who lied about me. She's the one who caused this whole mess, but somehow I'm the bad guy for calling her out. Yes, you are, Mom said, her tone firm but laced with disappointment. Because instead of trying to understand where Vanessa is coming from, you've spent this whole time attacking her. She's clearly not in a good place right now, and instead of helping her, you're just making things worse. I stared at her, stunned. So let me get this straight, somehow I'm the one in the wrong. Are you even hearing yourselves right now? Mom crossed her arms, her face stern. We're hearing you just fine, Dean, but what we're also hearing is that you don't seem to care about what Vanessa's going through. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Are you serious? I've been supporting this family for years, and this is how you repay me. Dad shook his head, his expression a mix of frustration and disappointment. This isn't about repayment, Dean. It's about doing the right thing. Vanessa's your sister, and she's clearly going through a tough time. Instead of embarrassing her like this, you should be helping her. I laughed bitterly, shaking my head. Helping her? That's all I've ever done. But every time I try to set a boundary, every time I say no, I'm suddenly the villain. Do you even realize how exhausting that is? Dean, Mom said, her voice softening again, you've always been the dependable one, the strong one. We didn't think you minded helping out. Well, I do mind, I said firmly, and I'm done. At that moment, Vanessa suddenly clutched her chest, gasping dramatically. Oh my God, she whimpered, slumping forward in her chair. I feel dizzy. Nat jumped up, panicking. Vanessa, are you okay? Mom rushed over, her face pale with concern. Honey, what's wrong? She's faking, I said flatly, crossing my arms. This is her move. She's playing the victim card again. No, Dean, Mom snapped, glaring at me. Can't you see she's struggling? Stop being so cold-hearted. I stood up, my patience finally snapping. You know what? Fine. Believe whatever you want. But I'm done playing this game. I stormed out of the room, leaving them all behind. As I walked out the door, I heard Vanessa's voice faintly behind me. Dean, wait. The room was heavy with tension, the kind that makes it hard to breathe. I could feel the weight of their stares, Mom's pleading eyes, Dad's disapproving glare, Vanessa's smug smirk as if they were all trying to will me into submission. But this time, I wasn't backing down, not after everything I'd been through. The lies, the manipulation, the endless guilt trips, it had gone on long enough. If they wanted my help one last time, they were going to play by my rules. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice steady despite the storm brewing inside me. If you really think I should pay for Vanessa's tuition despite her disrespect and lies over the years, fine. I'll do it. But there are conditions. Vanessa's eyebrows shot up, her carefully crafted mask of innocence slipping just enough for me to see the irritation beneath. Conditions, she echoed, her tone dripping with disbelief. What kind of conditions? I ignored her and turned to Mom and Dad, who exchanged uneasy glances. First, I continued, holding up a finger for emphasis, every single dollar I send will be accounted for. Vanessa will provide receipts for every expense related to her education. No more vague requests, no more hand-waving about how it's complicated. If I'm paying, I want transparency. Mom opened her mouth to protest, but I cut her off before she could say anything. Second, I said, raising another finger, this is the last time. After this payment, I'm done. No more money, no more favors, no more holidays where I'm treated like the family ATM. This is it, the final favor. The silence that followed was deafening. Vanessa stared at me, her mouth slightly agape, as if she couldn't believe I'd actually set boundaries. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his seat, while Mom looked like she might cry, but I wasn't finished yet. And third, I added, my voice growing firmer with each word, we're putting this agreement in writing. All of us, Mom, Dad, Vanessa, and me, will sign a document outlining these terms. If any of you violate them, I'm cutting off all contact. No calls, no texts, no emails, nothing. You can't be serious, Vanessa blurted out, breaking the stunned silence. Her voice was sharp, laced with panic. You're acting like we're some kind of business deal. That's exactly what this is, I shot back, meeting her gaze without flinching. For years, I've been your personal piggy bank, your safety net, your solution to every problem. And how have you repaid me? With lies, manipulation, and guilt trips. Well, those days are over. From now on, our relationship is going to be based on respect, or it's not going to exist at all. Mom let out a shaky breath, her hands trembling as she clutched the edge of the table. Dean, sweetheart, don't you think this is a little extreme? We're your family. We love you, love. I repeated, the word tasting bitter on my tongue. Is that what you call it when you take me for granted? When you side with Vanessa every single time, even when she lies about me? When you kick me out of Christmas because of something she made up? That's not love, Mom. That's exploitation. Dad finally spoke up, his voice gruff but tinged with frustration. Look, Dean, we get it. You're upset, but there's no need to make such drastic changes. We're all adults here. Can't we just move past this? No, we can't, I said firmly, my patience wearing thin. Because moving past it means pretending nothing happened, and I'm done pretending. For years, I've swallowed my pride, ignored the way you treat me, and kept giving because I thought it was the right thing to do. But guess what? It didn't fix anything. It only made things worse. So now, I'm taking control of the situation. Either you agree to these terms, or I walk away, and this time, I won't look back. Vanessa crossed her arms, her expression a mix of anger and disbelief. This is ridiculous, she muttered under her breath. You're making such a big deal out of nothing. A big deal out of nothing, I snapped, my voice rising. Vanessa, you lied about me to get me kicked out of Christmas, and now you expect me to hand over thousands of dollars without question. That's not nothing, that's abuse, and I'm not tolerating it anymore. She rolled her eyes, but I could see the cracks forming in her facade. For once, she didn't have an easy comeback, no sob story to spin. She knew I meant business. Mom reached across the table, her hand trembling as she placed it over mine. Please, Dean, she pleaded, her voice soft and desperate. We don't want to lose you. Can't we find a middle ground? There is no middle ground, I said, gently pulling my hand away. Either you respect my boundaries, or you don't. It's that simple. After a long pause, Dad sighed heavily, running a hand through his thinning hair. All right, son, he said reluctantly. If this is what you need to feel comfortable, we'll do it. But I hope you understand that this isn't easy for us either. I understand, I replied, my tone softening slightly, but it hasn't been easy for me either. And if you truly care about me, you'll honor this agreement. With that, the meeting came to an end. I left the house feeling a strange mix of relief and apprehension. Relief because, for the first time in years, I'd stood up for myself. Apprehension because I knew this wasn't the end of the battle. Vanessa wouldn't give up her golden ticket without a fight, and Mom and Dad would struggle to adjust to the new dynamic. But for the first time, I felt like I had control over my own life, and that was worth fighting for. The days following my ultimatum were eerily quiet at first. I expected some pushback, maybe even a guilt trip or two, but the silence that greeted me felt heavier than any argument ever could. It was as if they were waiting for me to crack, to come crawling back with an apology and another checkbook in hand. But I wasn't going to fold this time, not after everything I'd been through. Then came the first attempt to reel me back in. A few nights after our explosive family meeting, Mom called again. Her voice was soft, almost fragile, like she was trying to sound vulnerable instead of manipulative. "Dean, sweetheart," she began, her tone laced with practiced concern, "we've all had some time to think, and we just want you to know how much we miss you." "Miss me?" I repeated, incredulous. "Mom, you kicked me out of Christmas because of Vanessa's lies. Don't act like this is about missing me." She hesitated, clearly caught off guard by my bluntness. "Well, yes, that happened, but we're your family. We love you, and we understand now that things got out of hand. Can't we move past this?" "Move past it," I shot back, my patience wearing thin. "You mean go back to letting Vanessa lie about me while you side with her every single time?" "No thanks. I'm done being the scapegoat." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and for a moment, I thought she might actually drop the act, but then she switched tactics. "It's not just Vanessa, Dean. Your dad and we're worried about you. You've always been so independent, so focused on work. Don't you ever feel lonely? Don't you want to be part of something bigger than yourself?" I clenched my jaw, resisting the urge to snap at her. This was classic manipulation, playing on my insecurities to make me doubt myself. "Lonely? Seriously, Mom? After years of being treated like a cash machine, you think I'm sitting here feeling sorry for myself because I don't have enough family drama in my life? Save it." Her voice hardened slightly, losing its earlier warmth. "Fine, Dean, if that's how you want to see us. There's nothing more I can say. But remember, you're the one pushing us away." And with that, she hung up. The conversation left me fuming, but also strangely resolved. They weren't going to let me go without a fight, but neither was I. Things escalated quickly after that. A week later, I received an email from Vanessa, long, rambling message filled with passive-aggressive jabs disguised as heartfelt apologies. She started off by saying how hurt she was by my decision to cut ties, claiming that she never meant for things to spiral out of control. Then came the kicker: "If you continue down this path, Dean, I may have no choice but to inform your employer about your neglectful behavior toward our family." Surely they'd be interested to know how little regard you have for your responsibilities outside of work. My blood ran cold. Was she seriously threatening to sabotage my career over this? The audacity was staggering. For a moment, I considered calling her bluff, but deep down, I knew Vanessa well enough to realize she was capable of following through. Still, I refused to give in to her threats. Instead, I drafted a terse reply. "Do what you need to do, Vanessa. But remember, lies have consequences. If you take this route, don't expect me to stay silent." I hit send without looking back. Let her stew on that, but Vanessa wasn't done yet. Over the next few weeks, rumors began circulating among our extended family and mutual friends. People I hadn't spoken to in years suddenly reached out, asking if it was true that I'd abandoned my parents and sister during their time of need. One cousin even accused me of being selfish and ungrateful, implying that I owed my success entirely to the sacrifices my family had made for me. At first, I tried to ignore it. What did their opinions matter anyway? But the constant whispers wore me down. Every text, Every phone call felt like another knife twisting into my resolve. Even Matt, Vanessa's husband, chimed in during one particularly awkward encounter. "Look, Nan," he said, his voice dripping with false sympathy, "I get that you're upset, but maybe you should reconsider. Family's important, you know." I stared at him, incredulous. "Family's important? Really, Matt? Where was your family first attitude when Vanessa lied about me to kick me out of Christmas? Or when she demanded thousands of dollars right after treating me like dirt?" He shifted uncomfortably, clearly unprepared for my response. "I'm just saying, maybe try to see things from their perspective." "From their perspective," I laughed bitterly. "Let me guess they put you up to this, didn't they?" He didn't deny it. Instead, he mumbled something vague about keeping the peace before ending the call abruptly. By the end of the month, the pressure was relentless. My parents had joined forces with Vanessa, spreading tales of how I turned my back on them, how I was too selfish to help my struggling sister achieve her dreams. To outsiders, it probably sounded convincing. But I knew the truth, and that gave me strength. One night, unable to sleep, I sat down and wrote a detailed letter to everyone involved. In it, I laid out every instance of manipulation, every lie, every demand they'd placed on me over the years. I included screenshots of texts, emails, and receipts proving my contributions to the family. When I finished, I sent copies to my parents, Vanessa, and anyone else who dared to question my integrity. "You want to play dirty?" I muttered to myself as I pressed send. "Fine, let's see how far your lies take you." To my surprise, the backlash was immediate. Several relatives apologized privately, admitting they'd misjudged me based on Vanessa's version of events. Others stopped contacting me altogether, likely embarrassed by their role in perpetuating the gossip. As for Vanessa, she went silent for a while, at least. Looking back, I realized something important. Standing up for myself wasn't just about setting boundaries. It was about reclaiming my identity, my dignity. Sure, the road ahead would be rocky, but for the first time in years, I felt free. The aftermath of my decision to step back from my family felt like stepping into a void. For the first few months, I was completely isolated, not just from them, but from everyone else in my life too. Friends stopped calling as often, perhaps sensing the tension that had spilled over into every corner of my existence. Even my girlfriend at the time, Rachel, couldn't handle the fallout. She'd always been supportive, or so I thought, but when it came down to it, she wasn't prepared for the emotional toll my family drama took on our relationship. "Dean," she said one evening after yet another argument about Vanessa and her endless demands, "I can't keep doing this. It's not healthy for either of us." "What do you mean?" I asked, though deep down, I already knew where this was going. "You're constantly stressed, distracted, and angry," she replied, her voice trembling slightly. "And no matter what I say or do, it feels like your family is always between us. I love you, but I can't live like this anymore." Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Part of me wanted to beg her to stay, to explain how much I needed her support during this chaotic period. But another part of me, the part that had finally learned to set boundaries, knew she was right. My family had consumed me for so long that there was little room left for anyone else. So instead of fighting her, I nodded silently and let her walk away. But losing Rachel was only the beginning. The stress of everything began seeping into other areas of my life, most notably my job. At first, I tried to compartmentalize, keeping my personal struggles separate from my professional responsibilities. But the cracks started showing almost immediately. During meetings, I found myself zoning out, replaying arguments with Vanessa or imagining how my parents would react if I didn't respond to their texts. Deadlines slipped through my fingers, emails went unanswered, and projects that should have been straightforward turned into minefields of errors. One day, my boss called me into his office. His expression was unreadable as he gestured for me to sit down. "Dean," he began, leaning forward across his desk, "you've always been one of our top performers. But lately, well, your work has been slipping. Is everything okay?" I opened my mouth to reassure him, to tell him it was just a rough patch and that I'd get back on track soon, but the words caught in my throat. For a moment, I considered lying, blaming it on burnout or some vague medical issue, but something stopped me. Maybe it was the exhaustion weighing heavily on my shoulders, or maybe it was the realization that I couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. "I'm dealing with some family stuff," I admitted finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "It's been difficult." He nodded slowly, his gaze softening. "Family issues are tough. Just make sure you're taking care of yourself, all right? If you need time off, we can figure something out." His offer was kind, but I knew I couldn't afford to take time off, not financially, anyway. Instead, I promised to pull myself together and refocus. And for a while, I managed to scrape by, putting one foot in front of the other despite the chaos swirling around me. But the pressure never truly lifted. Every phone call, every text message felt like a ticking bomb waiting to explode. It wasn't until 6 months later that things began to shift slowly, painfully, but undeniably. One afternoon, I received an unexpected call from Mom. Her voice sounded different this time, less accusatory, more hesitant. "Hi, honey," she said softly. "How are you?" "I'm okay," I replied cautiously, bracing myself for whatever might come next. There was a pause, and then she sighed. "We miss you, Dean, all of us. Things haven't been the same without you." For a moment, I considered brushing her off with a curt response, but something in her tone gave me pause. Maybe it was genuine regret, or maybe it was desperation, I couldn't be sure. Either way, I decided to hear her out. "We've all made mistakes," she continued, her voice wavering slightly. "Including Vanessa. She's struggling more than she lets on. That doesn't excuse what she did," I said firmly, though my resolve wavered slightly. "No, it doesn't," Mom agreed quickly. "But she's trying, Dean. We all are. Can't we find a way to move forward?" I didn't answer right away. The idea of reconciliation felt foreign, almost impossible after everything that had happened. But deep down, I realized they were starting to understand at least a little that I wasn't going to bend anymore. They weren't ready to fully accept my boundaries, but they were learning to respect them. And for now, that was enough. Looking back, I can't help but marvel at how much my life has changed in the past year. It's not that I regret setting boundaries, I don't, but there were moments when the weight of those decisions felt unbearable. Cutting ties with Vanessa and stepping away from the toxic dynamic of my family wasn't just painful, it was devastating. For weeks after our explosive family meeting, I walked around like a ghost, haunted by guilt and self-doubt. Was I being too harsh? Had I overreacted? These questions swirled in my mind, gnawing at me like an open wound. The initial fallout hit harder than I expected. Friends stopped inviting me to gatherings, assuming I'd become that guy who burned bridges for no reason. Even colleagues at work seemed distant, as if they could sense the emotional storm brewing beneath my calm exterior. But the worst part, the thing that nearly broke me, was losing Rachel. She didn't leave because she hated me or because she couldn't handle conflict. No, she left because she couldn't handle me. The version of myself that emerged during this time wasn't someone she recognized anymore. I had become colder, angrier, more cynical, a shadow of the person she fell in love with. And honestly, I couldn't blame her for walking away. But here's the truth: letting go of people, even those closest to you, is sometimes necessary for survival. My family had spent decades taking advantage of my kindness, exploiting my willingness to help until it became a one-sided transaction. Every dollar I gave them, every favor I granted, reinforced their belief that I existed solely to serve them. Vanessa perfected the art of manipulation, twisting situations so effortlessly that even I began to question whether I was truly the bad guy. Mom and Dad, blinded by their loyalty to her, never questioned her stories or considered my side of things. They saw me as a resource, not a person. And while I wanted to believe that cutting them off would hurt them more than it hurt me, the reality was far messier. For months, I wrestled with the consequences of my decision. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying old memories in my head. I thought about Vanessa as a little girl, laughing on Christmas morning, her eyes lighting up as she unwrapped presents. I thought about Mom baking cookies in the kitchen, humming softly to herself. I thought about Dad teaching me how to fix the lawnmower in the garage, his hands guiding mine. Those moments weren't fake, they were real, tangible pieces of my childhood. But they were also tainted by years of imbalance, of giving without receiving, of loving without being loved in return. It took me a long time to accept that nostalgia isn't enough to sustain a relationship. Love shouldn't come with strings attached, yet for most of my life, that's exactly what I'd allowed. I poured everything I had into keeping my family afloat, only to be repaid with lies, manipulation, and betrayal. When I finally said no, it wasn't just a rejection of Vanessa's demands, it was a rejection of the entire system that enabled her behavior. Saying no meant acknowledging that my needs mattered too, even if it cost me the illusion of familial harmony. And oh, did it cost me? The isolation was suffocating at times. Holidays, once filled with chaotic laughter and forced cheer, now felt eerily quiet. Birthdays passed without calls or texts. I missed the noise, the chaos, the sheer unpredictability of having a family. But what I didn't miss, the thing I knew I couldn't endure any longer, was the constant pressure to sacrifice myself for their comfort. Setting boundaries taught me something crucial: kindness without limits is exploitation waiting to happen. You can't pour from an empty cup, and for years, I'd been running on fumes. Of course, preparing for the long-term consequences wasn't easy. I knew that standing up to Vanessa and my parents wouldn't magically fix everything overnight. Relationships aren't built or broken in a single moment, they evolve over time, shaped by actions and choices. By choosing to prioritize my well-being, I accepted that some relationships might never recover. That realization stung, especially when I thought about Matt, Vanessa's husband, who used to joke with me about football games or ask for advice on home repairs. He wasn't a bad guy, he was just caught in the crossfire of Vanessa's manipulations. Losing him hurt more than I cared to admit. Still, despite the pain, I found strength in the knowledge that I was reclaiming my life. Each boundary I set, each refusal to cave under pressure, reminded me that I was worth more than the role they'd assigned me. I wasn't just Dean, the dependable older brother or the financial backbone of the family. I was a human being with dreams, desires, and limits. Learning to say no didn't make me selfish, it made me whole. If there's one lesson I've taken away from all of this, it's that protecting yourself isn't selfish, it's survival. Yes, setting boundaries may lead to short-term losses, friendships strained, relationships fractured, holidays spent alone, but in the long run, it's the only way to preserve your sanity. Sometimes, the hardest decisions are the ones that save us from ourselves. And though the road ahead remains uncertain, I know one thing for sure: I'll never let anyone take advantage of me again, not even family.